This movie sucks so bad. Anyways, so yeah, my name is George, and with me is Chris, and today we are looking at 1993 Super Mario Bros.
We learn in this movie that their names are, in fact, Mario and Luigi Mario.
And they are, in fact, not brothers. I've never been a massive Super Mario Brothers fan. Because I didn't play these games when I was a kid. Like, just my family couldn't afford a gaming system. So I never played a Mario Brother game until I was, or a Super Mario game until I was in my teenage years when I had an emulator on my computer. I think that was the first time I went back and played Super Mario Brothers. But even then, like, I've never once considered or cared about the lore of that franchise because it doesn't matter. It's not that type of game.
Yeah, agreed.
So this movie could have really taken it any direction they wanted it, and they chose wrong.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Well, I'm going to, not disappoint you, but I didn't hate this movie. I can recognize that it's a terrible movie that fails at most things that it set out to do, but I couldn't find it within myself to hate it.
Like, I don't know, like, realistic, dark, and gritty is not the right approach. I don't know what the better approach could have been in another timeline, but whatever they did in this movie was not the right approach. Yeah.
I'm also just gonna lay all my cards on the table right up front and say that while researching this movie, I found out about the website smbmovie.com, which is Super Mario Bros. The Movie Archive, which is a fan-run, massive website dedicated to this movie, the production of this movie, everything that went wrong. And their reasoning on this website is that they don't defend it as a good movie, but they argue that it deserves a lot of recognition for what it was trying to do, even if it failed, and that it deserves recognition for being the bold first step in adapting video games to Hollywood films, which had never been done before. The Movie Archive people argue that that's like a fascinating thing, and I found myself agreeing because I did kind of get sucked in to all of the lore around the making of this film. And the reason I'm bringing that up in response to what you said is that part of what that includes is that they kind of went through 3 distinct drafts.
Yeah.
And they were all different versions. There's like a bright bouncy fantasy version that was all in Fantasyland. There was a the darkest and grittiest version that was like kind of the straight action thing and was darker and more mature. And then there was this final script that we got that was a perhaps uneven attempt to combine those 2 things, and also apparently in the end was essentially written in like 2 weeks by a new guy that came on after they were like 10 million in the hole before they even had anything more than the script. Like, it sounds like this whole thing was an absolute mess.
I would argue that sometimes with these attempts, the damage it's caused, it may not be worth being the first. In the sense that, look, I'm sure the movie makers had great intentions in the same way that I'm sure Thomas Midgley had great intentions when he decided to put lead in gasoline. But the damage that it did afterwards
sure
is not worth it to me. Because the damage this movie done, if I understand correctly, is that it made Nintendo completely skittish towards filmmaking, especially in Hollywood, for like decades after.
Until Detective Pikachu, I think.
Yeah, it took that long, and like think about how many other stories that they had that could have been made into potentially great films.
Okay, well, I'm not going to argue with you in that consequentialist framework. I think that's completely reasonable. And we've also talked about past movies that way, because we talked about how maybe Batman and Robin being so bad was what led Marvel towards finding the right thing. So
you've gotten it wrong 5 times.
0 for 5. 0 for 5. What percent is that?
I don't know.
This movie is an incredible mess, even by the standards of like a bad Hollywood movie. Like, the plot actually doesn't even make sense in a way that would be like unthinkable for a big budget movie today.
Yeah.
Like, major parts of the plot make just, you don't understand what's happening. I think it feels kind of clear that the cast was not like having a good time while making this movie, and that is often a thing. Some people, I think, can get away with not being that committed and can still make an enjoyable movie, but when the people that you're watching don't seem like they're enjoying themselves, I think that can be a really big problem. And I can tell you from my Super Mario Bros. Archive deep dives that you are right on. All the cast was having an awful, awful time.
That's what I've heard. Yeah, nobody wanted to be on this set, right? It's famously like the island of Dr.
Island of Dr. Moreau. And I guess like Bob Hoskins had his finger broken. John Leguizamo slammed it in a door. Possibly, no one's clear on this because him and Hoskins had taken to drinking between takes just to get themselves through the movie. But yeah, Hoskins had his finger slammed in a door and apparently is wearing a fake hand over his hand for a lot of the movie, so you can't see the cast. And he was stabbed and nearly drowned, and various things happened to him. He was electrocuted.
But also, I think the other part is, it's handled by, can we say, incompetent directors? Because there's two of them.
Yes.
Because if we talk about, films with bad or even animosity on set between actors and misfortunes and so on and so forth. You got Jaws. Mm-hmm. Famously a disastrous shoot with people who hate each other, got into fistfights, but go on to be one of the greatest films ever made because you have a competent director.
Right.
To rein things in still, no matter how disastrous it gets.
Most people seem united in blaming the directors for this movie and how bad things got. Whether that's completely reasonable, who knows, but when all the cast are saying the directors were jerks, that does kind of suggest something. I also learned that the directors, Annabelle Jankel and Rocky Morton, are a husband and wife team. I think it was Dennis Hopper said they were both control freaks and they didn't consult each other. So everyone just had two sets of angry orders coming at them all the time.
Yeah, even the set pieces, from one scene to another, feels disconnected. They feel
Absolutely.
Today we want avant-garde feel. Tomorrow, the next scene they felt like having, horror style. And then the scene after that, they wanted gritty New York.
Could anyone have done this right? Or what do you think the problems were in adaptation?
I feel like with a movie like this, or no, I shouldn't say movie, because with a franchise like this, where there is almost no lore, especially at the time when this movie was created, they really could have just went any direction they wanted, but they chose the wrong one by making it gritty. Because what I couldn't understand is who this movie was for. Mm-hmm. Because you have to consider from the time, right? From the time of its release, which the target audience for almost all video games would have been kids, maybe teenagers at best.
Right.
As the majority. So that means this movie should be targeted at that audience.
Right.
But then they made it grungy and realistic, and it felt like it was made for the parents at the time who would have seen the game or the franchise as nothing but silly kids' toys.
Right. And it's so interesting that you're saying this, and I totally agree. It's funny because my notes went in the exact opposite direction, which is that I liked the darkness and I wanted them to do more.
Right.
But we both obviously agree that it was very uncomfortably caught between.
Pick one or the other, right? If you're gonna go for kids, then make it fluffy. Make Yoshi look like Yoshi, not Jurassic Park. Don't make it look like a raptor. It is a raptor.
A raptor who then gets violently stabbed.
Maybe I'm wrong, but it feels like the directors didn't even bother to turn the game on once.
From what I read, different people had varying levels of interest in the game, but not only the directors, but the producers and also most of the writers never bothered.
Yeah, I'm not saying you need to play, classic Super Mario to try to get story inspiration, but at least figure out why people love it.
Oh my God. Oh no. Oh no.
We get a bit of character establishment, but by no means enough for us to care about anything that's going on at all. They meet Daisy, who's a young researcher, archaeologist who's involved in a dig that's being threatened by mobsters. All of this leads to a bunch of tomfoolery, but basically Daisy gets kidnapped, and what we learn is that the other dimension is a world where people evolved from dinosaurs rather than evolving from apes, as we did in our dimension.
But they all just look human anyways.
They are all human, to be clear. They just evolved from dinosaurs to be humans.
Yeah.
So we really are the pinnacle of evolution, no matter where we come from, apparently. But then the movie, kind of concerns them fighting against King Koopa, played by Dennis Hopper, who wants to reunite the worlds because he's kind of destroyed his world. So he wants to kind of get into ours and keep ruling everything, maybe.
I couldn't really figure out what was the point of the whole dinosaur thing.
No.
Koopa himself looks nothing like a dinosaur in the movie. Yeah, and then for some reason, of all the characters, or all the characters to apply the trait of dinosaurs to, they gave it to the Goombas?
Yeah.
Which are famously mushrooms?
Who are now, like, giant like bipedal bodies with like tiny little dinosaur heads that I guess like arguably are kind of Goomba-like. I was so thrown off because I thought the reason they gave them those tiny little heads was because Mario was going to go around like smashing them. I thought he was going to like whack-a-mole their heads, so it would be like the equivalent of squashing Goombas in the game.
They're also really creepy looking.
Yeah. There are nightclubs, there are corrupt cops, there are
a harem.
There's a harem. There's people being dumb characters are evolved forward, which makes them smart and talk with big words. Dennis Hopper like sometimes turns a little bit into a dinosaur and flicks a lizard tongue.
They use guns for some
reason.
They
use guns. That was one thing I was going to complain about for sure. Big Bertha, the red fish, appears as a woman who wears red. It's like they were intentionally trying to annoy everyone, except I definitely don't think they were, because they just didn't know about the game. But
yeah, I think so. I think that's what it is. I think they just literally had whatever handbook that came with the game back in the 90s, flipped through a few pages, saw the word plumber, saw a couple of, original artwork, and just went, okay, I think we can pull some ideas out of this.
Which reminds me, if you're interested in listening to the full-length discussion of this episode, you can find it on our Patreon. The link is on screen and in the description down below. If you go over there, you will get the entire recording in an audio format like a podcast. Check it out, support us, help us keep doing this. We really appreciate it. Anyways,
for better or for worse, I enjoyed the new Mortal Kombat for what it is, right? From what, 2 years ago now?
Yeah.
And I enjoyed it because it was clearly made by people who were fans of the game.
Yes.
Games. Now, granted, they had the benefit of having over a decade, 2 decades of like gradual lore build up to pull upon. I feel like we only got to this point after 20, 30 years of Hollywood trying to adapt games by saying, oh, but your average audience won't know the game, so let's just make it our own thing. And then we'll use the name only. And it's never worked out once.
Yeah, I agreed.
So I guess in that sense, this is probably, the start of those mistakes. Unfortunately, nobody learned a lesson from this, so...
Yeah, I'm trying to think, listeners, let us know, is there a movie that really kind of disregarded its source material this much, but that everyone loves? What did you think about the... So we have Real Brooklyn, and then we have Dino Hatton, and the kind of sci-fi explanation. Oh, actually, this is also cut from the movie, but apparently the premise was that years earlier, chasing baby Samantha Mathis into our universe, King Koopa saw what Manhattan was like and now has based Dino Hatton on Manhattan. But with or without that concept, tell me how you felt about Dino Hatton.
It was, you know what it felt like? It felt like they were trying to copy Total Recall in its aesthetics and design, but again, completely missed the point and the essence. Total Recall had a campiness to it. It had it had the same vibe in visual language, but it had fun. This movie didn't have fun.
Is what you're discovering here that Paul Verhoeven should have directed Super Mario Bros?
I mean, if we're going to stick with a full dark and just go with it, that probably would have been better.
It's true. He is the master of making something like colorful, big, bright, campy, but also just deeply, deeply inappropriate.
Do you know what the square root of 26,481 is?
What are you talking about?
191.
You were just pointing out the Goombas, so we have to have a big thing on why the Goombas look the way they look in this movie. We have to have a big thing on this dinosaur world that we made up and shoved into the movie. We have to have a big thing on Iggy and Spike, and they get devolved and evolved and et cetera, et cetera. If they had just not added all these elements, we wouldn't have to have them explained to us.
Here's what they could have done to explain without explaining why Goombas are in this movie and why do they look the way they do. Okay, it will only take 5 seconds. All they needed is a shot of a conveyor belt of people entering through a machine, coming out the other end looking like Goombas that are in this movie, and then King Koopa is standing at a higher platform with a whip, hits one of them, and says, "Go do your job." That's it. You get the entire dynamic.
Yeah, you're totally right.
Wait, instead they spent, what, 10 minutes explaining the machinery?
Yeah, it's a pretty
Why?
It's a pretty big sequence for something that has nothing to do with the movie. It's not like a thing that needs to be explained. We're talking about turning people into creatures and using a gun to kill the bad guy, which are pretty legible concepts for a movie audience.
Yeah.
I'm gonna make a monkey out of you, plumber. Trust the fungus.
Apparently, one of the many stories I read is that at one point, Dennis Hopper, with 300 extras waiting, Dennis Hopper was eventually just like broken by the constant rewrites and yelled at the directors for like 45 minutes is how this was described. He yelled at them for 45 minutes while like 300 extras were standing there. The whole crew was standing there, and he was just yelling. And finally they were like, "Let's break for lunch. We're going to go to lunch." So them and Dennis Hopper and the writers and whomever go to lunch, and they sit down, and Dennis Hopper immediately just goes back into it and yells for another 2 hours about like respect for actors and movie making and how to do things and blah blah blah. Anyway, so it sounds like the set was a disaster. The screenwriter also tells a story about Dennis Hopper chewing them out in a confrontation that included Dennis Hopper forcing them to get out a dictionary and look up the verb act.
Oh my god.
So that's probably a perfect transition to the
to our segment of anything we come up with would be better than this.
You want this darker adult tone, go ahead and do it, but just like introduce him as a plumber who lives in the Mushroom Kingdom, lives in this crazy world. He can throw fireballs, there are raccoon suits. Just do it with a straight face and do a classic Knight's Quest story where he has to fight his way through enemies, he has to face a dragon, he has to forge a bond of undying love with a princess. I kind of the thing I thought of for a tone comparison was like kind of like Men in Black in a Mario universe. Not that I wanted it to be sci-fi in that way, but like just that like fun tone where it's like pretty gross and dark and gooey and all of these things, but still like keeping the family fun, because that's a PG movie also. Like it's creepy and squishy and gooey and dark, but it's still something that I loved when I was a kid. Keep your tone, do what you want to do, but try to do the game.
Okay, cool. Then I guess that wraps it up for 1993 Super Mario Bros. Let's bury this out there in the landfill with E.T. the game. Next week, we are looking at a 80s action film that I've never heard of until about an hour ago before we started filming. It is Hard Ticket to Hawaii?
Correct. By the Schlockmeister Andy Sedaris.
I'm looking at the posters of previous films done by this director. There's definitely a theme. And the theme is there's always a muscly dude in the middle, surrounded by skimpily clad women.
Yep.
Always blonde.
Yep.
And they pretty much look identical.
Yeah, of a certain physique also.
He's like the American version of Tinto Brass.
Yes, I think that's a good argument. I think that's the area. It's like, but very American because way more explosion.
Okay, we're done. Like and subscribe and all of that. Go play some actual Mario and have fun instead of watching this crap.
And trust the fungus.